Okay, so, we're diving deep today into something that I think a lot of us have a pretty, surface level understanding of, but maybe haven't really gone super deep on, right? And that's the LGBTQ movement. Like, we all see the parades, the legal battles, the whole thing with how we even talk about gender and sexuality keeps changing. It's a lot.
Yeah, definitely a lot going on.
But what's wild, what's so interesting is that when you actually look into the history, it's not some recent thing at all. I mean, same-sex love, gender diversity, all of that, it goes back, like way back. We're talking centuries, different cultures all over the world, the whole nine yards.
Absolutely. That's been one of the biggest things that's just jumped out from, all the research and the sources you pulled together for this. It's like, wow, this is ancient, this is global. It really makes you think about it differently.
It really does. And I think the other thing that's really stuck with me is how much of this history has been, I don't know, almost deliberately hidden or ignored.
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't talked about, it wasn't recorded, and in some cases, people actively tried to erase it, which, makes things like LGBT History Month even more important, right? It started in the U.S. back in '94, but now it's a global thing. It's about making sure we don't forget, we remember and we learn from it.
It's like reclaiming that narrative in a way.
Totally.
Because for so long, it's been either silenced or told from a very specific perspective. But when you start looking at it globally, it just explodes. Like the variety, the different ways different cultures have understood and experienced same-sex love, gender fluidity.
Well, yeah.
Just take East Asia, for example. We've got ancient Chinese literature talking about, stuff like the leftover peach story and the cut sleeve story. It's pretty clear they're hinting at same-sex relationships, even among, like, emperors and stuff.
Which I got to admit, it kind of throws you for a loop, right? Because we have this, like, almost stereotypical view of these cultures as being, super strict and all that.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then you find out that the more negative, restrictive stuff, in some cases, came later. And it might have even been because of Western influence, which is kind of ironic.
It's like the opposite of what you'd think.
Yeah, it really shows how, cultural exchange doesn't always go in a straight line. Sometimes it takes these unexpected turns. And you see a similar thing in Japan.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like before the whole Meiji Restoration, you had traditions like wakashudu and nanshoku. These were male-male relationships, and they were pretty well accepted. Kind of like pederasty in ancient Greece, but not exactly the same.
Right, right.
Often it involved mentorship and, romantic or sexual elements. You even see it reflected in classic literature like The Tale of Genji. But then, boom, modernization comes along, Western influence, and suddenly you have anti-homosexuality laws.
Wow.
It's almost like a pattern,
It's true.
Initial openness, then a clampdown. And this takes us, we can shift gears to Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands. And it's just as fascinating, if not more so.
Yeah.
We're talking temple murals in Thailand that are centuries old showing same-sex couples. And you know that in the Philippines, there are documented same-sex marriages from way back in the 1500s.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole Babilan tradition, gender nonconforming folks who were not just accepted, they were like revered, seen as spiritual leaders. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And then, hopping over to the Pacific Islands is like a whole other level of diversity and acceptance. Many of those cultures had well-defined roles for what we might call third gender folks.
Oh, right.
Like in Maori culture, you have the Takatapui. In Hawaii, it's the Mahu and Moikan. And same-sex relationships were just part of the fabric of life in a lot of Melanesian societies. Really makes you question the whole idea of this being a purely Western phenomenon, right?
It definitely does.
And it makes the impact of colonialism even more tragic.
Oh, yeah.
The research points out how, especially British colonial laws, they kind of imposed this anti-LGBTQ plus attitude on a lot of these places. It's kind of heartbreaking. Yeah.
But, there's hope, right?
Yeah.
Some countries like Cambodia, East Timor, they're starting to take more progressive steps. So
Yeah.
That's definitely a positive sign.
That is good to hear.
Yeah. And it's important to remember, these early perspectives on same-sex love, gender nonconformity, they weren't all sunshine and rainbows.
Oh, yeah.
It varied a lot. Take South Asia, for instance.
Okay.
The research talks about how Zoroastrianism, pretty early on, had some homophobic ideas.
Really?
Yeah. And those kind of filtered down into later religious and legal systems. But then, on the flip side, you've got Hinduism, where ancient texts and temple art actually depict same-sex relationships.
Interesting.
And early Hindu medical writings, they didn't even judge it. Like, it
Yeah.
was just a thing. And then you got the Hindra tradition, a third gender that's been recognized in South Asia for centuries. It's a really mixed gag, you know?
Yeah,
It's not simple.
for sure. Now, what about the Middle East? Because the overview on that was, I don't know, it was really eye-opening.
Oh, yeah. Lots of interesting stuff there. I mean, like the Abbasid Caliphate, for instance. They had, like, all this literature and poetry, and some of it talked about same-sex relationships pretty openly.
Yeah.
But what I found fascinating was how they seemed to categorize it more by, I don't know, like the specific acts rather than a fixed orientation. And we see examples of both, like male and female same-sex stuff in their writings.
Exactly. I think it's really important to remember that the whole idea of sexual orientation as a defining identity, it's really a modern Western concept.
That's a good point.
In a lot of these older cultures, it was more about what you did, not who you were in some essential way.
Right,
Like
yeah.
medieval Egypt, for instance. You had tolerance and disapproval kind of existing side by side.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's the Siwa Oasis, which had this unique, long-standing acceptance of male homosexuality. It's complicated. You
Yeah.
can't just apply modern categories to the past.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And of course, we've got to talk about the ancient stuff, right? Like ancient Egypt, there's all that speculation about Nemhotep and Nianchchnum.
Yeah.
And then in Coptic Egypt, they found a love spell
Yeah.
between two men written on like a piece of parchment.
Yeah, those would be great examples.
And what about Assyria?
Oh, Assyria.
They have these laws that were super strict about male intercourse in the military, but at the same time, they also had prayers praising same-sex love.
Right. It's all over the place.
Makes you wonder what was really going on there.
Exactly. It's like, how do you interpret these bits and pieces that we have? I mean, yeah, persecution and condemnation definitely existed. I mean, you see it in the Torah, right?
Yeah.
The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, those prohibitions. And it just got more intense in Europe during the Renaissance.
Right.
Homosexuality was linked to heresy. You had thinkers like Thomas Aquinas arguing it was against natural law. It was a rough time. It sounds like it. Now, before we get too far, I definitely want to make sure we talk about the Two-Spirit tradition in the Americas, because that's just so powerful and important.
Absolutely.
I mean, the research really highlights how in a lot of indigenous cultures, people who we might now call, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gender nonconforming, they weren't just tolerated, they were actually given important roles, like spiritual roles.
Yeah, they were often seen as holding a special kind of knowledge or connection to both masculine and feminine energies.
Right, exactly. Like they weren't just different, they were special.
Yeah,
It wasn't just tolerance, it was respect, it was reverence.
definitely. And it's important to remember there's a lot of diversity within that tradition too, right?
Right.
Like different nations, different names, different roles. And there's even some debate now about using the term two-spirit as a kind of catch-all because it can oversimplify things.
Right, that's fair.
But it's still a powerful concept. And it shows us that these ideas of gender and sexuality existing outside of a strict binary, it's not new.
Yeah.
It's been around for a long time.
It's like, again, we think of these things as modern, but so much of it is actually rooted in these ancient traditions.
Right, exactly.
Now, there's also, and I found this really fascinating, there are examples from sub-Saharan Africa, like the Motsal relationships in Lesotho, where women would have these really close, intimate relationships, but it wasn't necessarily seen as like lesbianism in the way we think of it today.
Right.
And it was accepted, even alongside traditional marriages.
Right. It shows how different cultures could have very different ways of understanding these relationships.
And there's also the example of the Azande, where male warriors would take on boy wives.
Right. That's another one that challenges our modern categories.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like all over the world, you have these different, often very complex ways of approaching gender and sexuality that don't necessarily fit neatly into our, 21st century boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we get to Europe. We've got to talk about ancient Greece, obviously.
Oh, of course. I mean, the whole concept of pederasty, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Erastes and Eromenos, older men, younger boys. It was like an institution.
Mm.
But even back then, they had different opinions on it.
Right. Some philosophers, like Plato, initially praised it, but later on, even he came to see some problems with it.
Oh, interesting.
And Aristotle, he wasn't a fan of Plato's ideas on this, so even in ancient Greece, it was a topic of debate. And then, of course, there's Sappho. She was a poet from the island of Lesbos, and her writings are full of passionate expressions of love for women. And that's actually where the terms lesbian and sapphic come from.
Oh, wow.
But there's still debate about whether her poems are describing just, like, emotional intimacy or if they're talking about actual physical relationships.
I can see why that would be tricky to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But regardless, Sappho's legacy is undeniable. She's become a kind of icon for women loving women throughout history.
That's really cool.
And in ancient Rome, you had a different dynamic. It wasn't so much about age, but about, active versus passive roles.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, it was okay for a Roman man to be the penetrative partner with another man as long as that other man wasn't a Roman citizen.
Oh, wow.
But if a Roman citizen took the passive role, that was considered like a big no-no. It was all about power and social status.
So the Middle Ages in Europe, seems like that's when things took a pretty dark turn, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
I mean, even though there's been some debate about whether there were, like, same-sex relationships in Christian monasteries and stuff, the overall trend was definitely towards more and more condemnation.
Right. You had religious authorities coming down hard on homosexuality, listing it as a sin.
Right.
And then during the High Middle Ages, persecution really ramped up. It was tied to accusations of heresy, witchcraft, all sorts of bad things.
Yeah.
And then, you have figures like Thomas Aquinas, who was a super influential theologian.
Mm-hmm.
He argued that homosexuality was against natural law.
So it was like a combination of religious and philosophical arguments.
Exactly. And that combination really laid the groundwork for the persecution that followed.
So then the Renaissance was even worse.
Pretty much, yeah. The Catholic Church really cracked down.
Oh, wow.
Homosexual acts were outlawed across much of Europe. Punishments got more severe. And there was this whole idea that homosexuality was somehow foreign, unchristian,
Yeah.
It was a way to kind of otherize and demonize LGBTQ people.
So how did we go from that to, the modern LGBTQ movement? I mean, it seems like a huge leap.
Well, the 18th and 19th centuries, that's when you start to see some shifts. I mean, it wasn't pretty at first.
How so?
Well, as science and psychology started to develop, they started to look at same-sex attraction through a new lens, but it was often a very negative one. They talked about it in terms of, like, degeneracy and perversion.
Right, I've heard of that.
But at the same time, it was a shift away from purely religious condemnation.
So it was almost like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And it also led to some key changes in terminology, like the word homosexual. That was actually coined in the late 19th century.
Oh, wow.
And Michel Foucault, the philosopher, he pointed out this really important thing. He said that the way we talk about something can actually shape the way we think about it. Like, before, it was the sodomite who was seen as like a temporary sinner, but now it was the homosexual, a new kind of person, almost like a different species.
So just by changing the language, they were creating a whole new category of person.
Yeah, and that had a big impact on how LGBTQ people were perceived and treated.
That's amazing.
Now, in Great Britain, things were really tough for a long time. They had these anti-sodomy laws that had been around for centuries, and they were used to persecute men who had sex with men. Lesbian relationships weren't really on the legal radar as much, but that didn't mean they were accepted. It was just more hidden,
Yeah.
And there were these underground places like the Molly houses where LGBTQ people could meet in secret.
That sounds kind of dangerous.
It was. And later on, you start to see more men writing about lesbian relationships, but often in a very voyeuristic way. It was more about male fantasy than about women's actual experiences.
Oh, wow.
But we do have some incredible personal accounts from this period, like Anne Lister's diaries.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
She was a lesbian who lived in England in the early 1800s, and she kept these incredibly detailed diaries about her life and her relationships with women. It's amazing.
And then, of course, there's Oscar Wilde.
Oh, Oscar Wilde. I mean, his story is so tragic.
Oh, yeah.
He was a brilliant writer, a playwright, a wit, and he was openly gay, or as open as you could be in those days.
Right.
But he was prosecuted for gross indecency and ended up spending 2 years in prison, hard labor. It ruined him.
That's awful.
And then you have Alan Turing, the brilliant mathematician who helped crack the Nazi Enigma code during World War II.
Oh, yeah, I know about him.
I mean, he basically saved countless lives. But after the war, he was persecuted for being gay, chemically castrated. He committed suicide.
That's so horrible.
It's just heartbreaking.
It makes you realize how far we've come, but also how much further we have to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, it wasn't all bad in Europe, right? Like France decriminalized homosexuality way back in 1791.
Yeah, they were actually the first in Western Europe to do that.
That's amazing.
And then you have the Soviet Union, which also decriminalized it fairly early on after the revolution. They even supported homosexual rights for a while in the 1920s.
Really?
Yeah, it's true. But sadly, that didn't last. Later on, under Stalin, things got much worse for LGBTQ people in the Soviet Union.
Hmm. It seems like there's this back and forth, this push and pull throughout history.
Yeah, it's definitely not a linear progression. It's more like a spiral with steps forward and steps back.
That's a good way to put it. Now, what about the United States? Because that's a whole other story.
All right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, in the 18th and 19th centuries, they inherited those sodomy laws from England, and they were brutal.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking the death penalty in some cases.
It's hard to believe.
It is, but it's important to remember that there were already some voices of dissent back then. Like, Pennsylvania was the first state to get rid of the death penalty for sodomy.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, it was a small step, but it was a step. And then, in the 19th century, you start to see hints of male homosexuality in literature and culture, but it was often veiled, kind of hidden between the lines.
Right, like Walt Whitman. I remember reading some of his poems in school.
Exactly. There were these homoerotic undertones in his work, but it was very subtle. And he never really came out and said, hey, I'm gay.
Yeah.
But it's there if you know what to look for.
And what about women? Were there any, openly lesbian figures in the U.S. during that time?
Well, not in the same way, but you have people like Wihua, the Zuni Lamana.
Oh, right. I remember reading about them in the overview. They were like...
A third gender figure, yeah. They lived their life very openly and were respected in their community.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, these examples show that LGBTQ people were always there, even if they weren't always visible or acknowledged in the same way.
So moving into the 20th century, things started to change, right?
Yeah, definitely. You start to see the first real stirrings of what would become the modern LGBTQ movement. Like, in the early 1900s, you have the first public defenses of homosexuality in the U.S. People are starting to speak out, write about their experiences.
Oh, wow.
And you have the emergence of these subcultures, places where LGBTQ people could meet and connect with each other.
So it's like they were starting to form a community.
Exactly. But of course, there was also backlash, like the whole purity movement.
Oh, right. That was a big deal back then.
Yeah, there were these campaigns against vice and immorality, and LGBTQ people were often targeted.
So it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Pretty much. But then in the 1920s, that was a really interesting time.
How so?
Well, in urban areas especially, there was this period of greater social acceptance. It was reflected in popular culture, too. Like, you had these pre-code Hollywood films that would sometimes feature LGBTQ characters.
Oh, wow.
And there were songs about masculine women and feminine men, even openly gay and lesbian actors. There were these clubs called pansy clubs that were pretty open about catering to an LGBTQ clientele.
Wow, it sounds like things were really changing.
Yeah, it was a brief moment of openness. Mae West, the actress and playwright, she even wrote a play called The Drag that was all about homosexuality.
So what happened? Why didn't it last?
Well, the Great Depression hit and then World War II. And with those crises came a return to conservatism. LGBTQ people were pushed back into the closet, and the whole idea of homosexuality as a mental illness took hold.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was. And the police started cracking down on LGBTQ gathering places. They would use entrapment, all sorts of tactics to arrest people.
So it sounds like the 1930s and 40s were a pretty dark time.
Yeah, definitely. And then you have the Lavender Scare.
The Lavender Scare.
Yeah, it was basically a witch hunt against LGBTQ people in the government.
Oh, wow.
They were seen as security risks, susceptible to blackmail by the Soviets. It was totally unfounded, but it ruined a lot of lives.
So how do we get from that to, Stonewall and the modern gay rights movement?
Well, it's important to remember that even during those dark times, there were people fighting for their rights. Like, there were these homophile organizations that were working to change public opinion and challenge discriminatory laws.
Oh.
They were kind of the precursors to the modern LGBTQ movement. And they staged some important protests and demonstrations, like the sip-in at Julius's bar in 1966.
What was that?
It was a really clever protest. A group of gay men went to this bar that refused to serve them, and they just sat there demanding service.
Oh, wow.
It was a way to expose the discrimination they faced and get people talking about it.
So it's like they were laying the groundwork for Stonewall.
Exactly, because Stonewall wasn't just some random event. It was the culmination of years of frustration and activism.
Right.
And it wasn't just about gay men either. It was about lesbians, transgender people, drag queens, everyone who was being targeted and marginalized.
So what exactly happened at Stonewall?
Well, in June 1969, the police raided the Stonewall Inn, which was this gay bar in Greenwich Village in New York City.
Okay.
These raids were pretty common back then, but this time the people in the bar fought back. They resisted arrest, they threw bottles and bricks, and it turned into a full-blown riot that lasted for days.
Wow.
And that's what really sparked the modern gay rights movement, not just in the US, but around the world. The first anniversary of the riots, they had this march, and that was the beginning of the pride parades that we know today.
So Stonewall was a turning point.
Absolutely. It was a moment of defiance, of solidarity, and it really galvanized the movement. And from there, things started to change, slowly but surely.
So tell me about this whole thing with terminology and inclusivity. I mean, it seems like the language around LGBTQ identity is always changing.
Yeah, it's definitely been evolving, and it reflects some of the internal debates and tensions within the movement itself.
All right.
Like, early on, the term homosexual was the dominant one, but it started to carry a lot of negative baggage, so people started using gay in the 1970s as a more positive and affirming term.
Right, right.
And then it became gay and lesbian to acknowledge that these were distinct identities and experiences.
But what about bisexual and transgender people? Where do they fit in?
Well, that's where things get a bit complicated. They often faced resistance and criticism from within the gay and lesbian community, especially in the late 70s and early 80s.
Really?
Yeah, there was this whole debate about whether they were gay enough or lesbian enough, and whether their inclusion would dilute the movement's message. It wasn't pretty.
So how did things change?
Well, around 1988, the initialism LGBT started to be used more widely. It was a way to signal a more inclusive coalition, encompassing lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. And the 1990s saw more effort to ensure equal respect and representation for all of those groups.
And then you have the whole thing with the word queer, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting case. It was a slur for a long time, a way to insult and demean LGBTQ people. But in the 1990s, some people started reclaiming it as a badge of honor, a way to express pride and challenge the idea that they needed to fit into neat boxes.
Oh, I see. It's like they were taking back the power of the word.
Exactly, and that led to the initialism becoming LGBTQ. But it's still a controversial term, and some older LGBTQ people, especially those who experienced it being used against them, find it really painful.
Yeah, I could understand that. So it's still evolving.
Oh, absolutely. Like now you see LGBT+, LGBTQIA, and all these variations. The I is for intersex people, the A is for asexual, aromantic, and agender people, and the PUCUS is meant to include everyone else who doesn't fit neatly into those categories.
So it's like trying to create a bigger and bigger umbrella.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. But it's also led to some pushback, with people arguing that these longer acronyms are too cumbersome, like alphabet soup, and that they make it harder for people outside the community to understand.
That's a fair point. Now, what about transgender people? Because the terminology around that seems to be particularly fluid.
Yeah, that's true. The term transgender itself is relatively recent, and it's meant to be a broader term that encompasses a variety of gender identities and expressions that don't conform to the traditional male-female binary.
Okay.
And you also have trans with an asterisk, which is meant to be even more inclusive. And then there's transsexual, which some people still use, but it's often considered a subset of transgender.
So it's like a spectrum within a spectrum.
Yeah, pretty much. And then you have intersex people, who are sometimes included in the acronym as LGBTI or LGBTIQ.
And what does intersex mean exactly?
Well, it refers to people who are born with variations in their sex characteristics that don't fit typical definitions of male or female.
Oh, interesting.
And while there's definitely overlap between intersex and LGBTQ communities, they also have their own distinct issues and concerns. And not all intersex people identify as LGBTQ, so it's important to be sensitive to that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about the A in LGBTQIA, those folks?
Right. So the A stands for asexual, aromantic, and agender people.
Okay.
Asexuality is about not experiencing sexual attraction. Aromanticism is about not experiencing romantic attraction. And agender is about not identifying with any gender.
So it's like a whole other dimension of diversity.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the A in LGBTQIA stands for those identities, not for ally.
Right. That's a common misconception.
It is. Now, all of this talk about terminology and inclusion, it reflects some of the deeper tensions and disagreements within the movement itself.
Like what?
Well, there are people who criticize the whole idea of a monolithic LGBT community, arguing that it obscures the real differences in experiences and priorities between different groups.
Oh, I see.
Like lesbian and gay advocacy has sometimes been at odds with transgender and intersex advocacy. And then there's the whole, Drop the T campaign, which is basically transphobic and tries to exclude transgender people from the movement altogether.
Yeah, that's messed up.
It is, and it just shows that even within a movement that's supposedly about inclusion and equality, there can be these really deep divisions.
So where does that leave us? I mean, is there a perfect term, a perfect way to encompass all of this diversity?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the word queer is gaining traction as a kind of catch-all term, but it's still controversial for some people.
Yeah.
And then you have acronyms like SGM, GSM, GSRM, which are used in more formal contexts like government and academia. They stand for things like sexual and gender minorities or gender, sexual, and romantic minorities.
Okay.
And then you have regional variations. Like in Canada, they often use 2SLGBTQ plus was, which acknowledges the unique experiences of Indigenous peoples.
Wow.
And then there are even more niche terms like MoGI, GSD, all sorts of things.
So it's like the language is constantly evolving to try to keep up with the reality of people's lived experiences.
Exactly. It's messy, it's complicated, but it's also really hopeful, I think.
Hopeful. How so?
Well, it shows that we're moving away from these rigid categories and trying to create a language that's more inclusive and more reflective of the full spectrum of human diversity.
I like that. So we've gone on this journey, right?
Yep.
From ancient history to the present day. And we've seen how the LGBTQ movement has been shaped by social norms, cultural shifts, legal battles, scientific discoveries, personal